Good afternoon, this is Lora Cecere, and today we're going to talk about the future of technology and where is it headed. Before we get started, let me go through some housekeeping items. Our mission at Supply Chain Insights is to share open content. This content will be shared openly. We will share the replay, and we'll also share the content of the slides with you. Our goal is that you share them freely with the groups inside your company, and that when you do, that you give attribution. So all of the slides will be shared. Today, I will be joined by a panel, and I chose the panel based upon a couple of considerations. I had worked with Kimberly Nickel at AMR Research, and Kimberly recently worked at IDC, and so she brings with her a lot of experience looking at similar technologies. I also asked the founder of Blue Cruise, who's working on some very innovative technology for lights out planning and the digital twin, to join us to give us some new thinking around technology. And my friend Rick Davis from Kellogg, who worked in the front office area at Kellogg with trade promotion management, forecasting, and most recently joined the data governance office to really give us three perspectives: an analyst perspective, an innovative best of breed perspective, and a practitioner perspective. So Kimberly, tell the group a little bit more about yourself other than what I just shared. Now you're in Blue Metal. It's a new group and you're doing some work on the manufacturing industry. So tell the group a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Laura. Happy to join you today. As Laura said, I've joined a new company, Blue Metal, which is actually a division of Insight Enterprises. And we at Blue Metal, we work with manufacturers as they're adapting new technologies like AI and IoT, as well as some of the more what we'd almost call standard technologies these days, like mobile and using portals and cloud. So I've only been here a few weeks, and my job is basically to develop our relationship with manufacturers even more than we have, and I'm looking forward to a new challenge.
Well, and welcome to the technology side. And Cone, tell the group a little bit about yourself and what you're doing at Blue Cruise and your mission.
Yep. So thanks for having us, Laura. So hello everyone on the call. So indeed, my name is Koen. I'm one of the founding partners of Blue Cruise. We're a supply chain operations company of about 70 people, and we are helping our customers, let's say, in the domain of supply chain, and to help them to make supply chain future-proof. Historically, we've always been doing that in, let's say, everything related to planning, distribution, operations, customer. But obviously, over the last 3 to 4 years, more and more also on transformation and digital. And what we're helping our customers with is to see how technology can enable them to take the next step in where supply chain is heading towards. And I think, obviously, it will be part of today's topic in where new technology can do that. It's mainly around data, to be honest. It all starts there in how, let's say, today companies are getting more access to that and how they can use that to drive new insights and in new way of organizing their supply chain, not only within their own company, but also across the companies of a certain value chain. And it's something that we're doing with a lot of customers in semi-process, process industries. And it's at the tip of doing new things, discovering new areas, with also some lessons learned, and looking forward to discuss those.
And you're coming to us today from the Netherlands? Your company is located in...
Yep, we're in Europe. We're in the center of Europe. We're located around Brussels, the Brussels region, and we are operating out of that, typically, let's say, for EMEA customers, but also global customers, US and ASPAC oriented.
Okay. And I asked Cone today because they're one of the first companies I actually heard actualizing the digital twin, which is a new concept and one that I wanted to get some real life experience around. Rick, why don't you tell the group a little bit about yourself?
I'd be happy to, Laura. Good afternoon, everyone, and Laura, thanks for having me on the panel. So I spent the majority of my professional career at the Kellogg organization, doing a number of different roles, as you mentioned. I retired from the Kellogg company at the end of the year after spending the last 2 years of my career there standing up the global data office. So Colin, as you mentioned, data. You're absolutely right. It's the foundation, it's the building blocks for a lot of the things that we're trying to do. So through my career at Kellogg, I was able to work in a lot of different spaces. And since I've retired, I've been doing some advisory work across some organizations, predominantly in the areas of understanding demand and still doing some work on trade promotions, which I don't think that work will ever go away. It seems like all companies get hung up in that one. And I'm just fascinated by where the technologies are headed and the promises that they have. So I'm very grateful to be a part of the panel today, Laura. Thank you.
Okay, and so consistent with our mission where we do our monthly webinars, I try to get a diverse panel so that you can get perspectives from different views, and we try to use our research as the backdrop to have a dialogue. And basically, I'll present a couple of slides, and then I'll ask our panel to join us. And we've had a number of panel members, over the months, and I try to get a variety of inputs. Today, we've got almost 100 people that have joined us for this technology panel. I think there's a lot of interest in where's the future of technology going. So, when I recruited, I said that when we think about supply chain, we think about a broad definition of supply chain from the customer's customer to the supplier's supplier. And it's sometimes called value chain, sometimes called value network, but it's anything other than functional thinking, which is the traditional thinking of ERP, CRM, SRM, MES. The historic functioning has always been around batch processes, linear optimization, process standardization, and it's been around making traditional silos more efficient. What we're talking about today is really value network, outside-in processes, the use of different data forms, data that moves at different speeds, structured and unstructured data, open source analytics, and the ability to better use sensors to drive intelligent response and then to make it autonomous and localized. Now, the concept of outside-in processes is really very young, and we're just beginning the journey. And we've got a lot of new technologies that are driving digital transformation. And I define digital transformation as transforming the atoms and electrons of the supply chain through the confluence of new technologies. And the ones that I'm following are blockchain, streaming data, Internet of Things, 3D printing, often called additive printing, robotics, wearables, mobility, cognitive computing, and open source analytics. And we could argue about, how to position these images, but in my history as an analyst, I have never seen a greater influx of new technologies. And one of the cautions is that I don't think we should just digitize data or make data move more quickly based upon existing processes. Instead, I think there is an opportunity for us to redesign the atoms and the electrons of the supply chain to really make it more effective, because what we see is 90% of companies are really stuck. So let's just start. So Kim, when you think about new processes and technology convergence, what excites you and what processes and evolution are you excited about?
Yeah, so if I understand your question correctly, I absolutely think that those technologies coming together provide a lot more value than the individual technologies. So one of the areas that I was seeing at IDC and I continue to see is the combination of artificial intelligence and big data and analytics and advanced analytics in general, applied to more types of data, especially sensor data. And I've also seen some interesting applications with photos and videos, combining those technologies. So I think it's, data, and also thinking more broadly in terms of information transformation. Not a lot of companies are able to kind of follow through on the big vision all at once. So one of the things that I like to do is to translate it into different kind of digital innovation areas. And I'm certainly seeing where I am today at Blue Metal, a lot of focus on essentially connected products and applying those products, kind of managing those products, servicing those products, and also in the plant. So smart manufacturing, or Industry 4.0, if you will.
And when you say connected products, are these Internet of Things discrete items, or how do you define that?
Yeah, so I think of a connected product as something that has that is collecting data from a sensor, and ideally, through a wireless network, is sharing that data so that it may be aggregated with other types of data and analyzed. But a connected product itself means that it is able to collect the information and share the information in order to drive additional processes or benefits to the customer. Maybe that's the easiest way to think of it.
Okay. Rick, how about yourself? What excites you about the ignition of this convergence for processes?
Well, I think what excites me the most is that it's forcing companies to look at their processes because I think there's been quite a gap in a lot of areas where the tried and true was just the way they did things. And before you really can take advantage of the technologies that are coming into the marketplace and they're advancing so rapidly, it really requires you to take a look and understand what it is that you are doing, and are you in a situation where that process might be ripe for reevaluation or redesign, and the technologies can enable you to do that. So I think that, as an example, everyone is talking about, blockchain technologies and what the promises are. And I think it's really interesting, though, that when you look at a recent study, I think they said that and this organization that performed the study said that 92% of the blockchain projects over the last 2 years have failed or are dead because they really didn't have the business use case defined and were going down the right path to be able to actually implement it. So I think that companies are at a crossroads where they still have a lot to learn, and thinking that they can do it all at once, I think, might be a bit of a stretch. I'm not sure that companies are resourced or have the education understanding right now to really, in a lot of fields anyway, to take it on at all levels. So there are a lot of things to excite you, but I think that you have to temper the excitement with the reality of what you can actually ingest.
Can I add a comment there?
Yeah.
I heard a manufacturer say something really clever, and it has always stuck in my head. It was basically new technologies plus bad processes equals expensive bad processes. So I think that's a great comment, Rick.
Yeah, and I think we got a lot of that. Cohen, what's your thoughts? What excites you about this convergence?
Yep. Well, I think my excitement really origins from the fact that I believe that companies, slowly but surely, are being inspired by companies like Google, etc., to slowly tear down data silos. Data silos have always existed within companies and between companies. And I think it's by slowly tearing down those data silos that we're getting all kinds of new insights into where we can bring value to a company. I think if you look back to the days, it was very much indeed also due to probably the absence of new technology that we were very much restricted to looking at planning data, looking at manufacturing data, looking at customer data. For sure, we were not able to look at the data of our customers themselves or the customers of our customers. And I think enabled or supported by all these new technology that is able to carry lots of more data, but also different kind of structures of data, non-structured data, and on whole new ways of looking at algorithms, trying to tie those together, that we can create whole new insights. And for me, that by definition means that there is a whole convergence of looking at value chains, to be honest, looking where the business can create value and how processes are looking end-to-end, but not end-to-end in this kind of sequential way, but more in a value way. And I think that's something that really excites me across the entire emergence of new technologies, whether it being enabled by IoT, whether it being enabled by new data storage technologies, whether it being enabled by AI to, on a smarter way, scroll or crawl through that data to link them together. I think altogether they're creating new insights that probably 5 or 10 years ago we were never able to generate, and a way of creating value for the business that we were never able to generate. And I think that's probably the most exciting thing, because I think also moving forward, there is a whole new ballpark game of elements that we can still discover by linking all new types of data together. And I think that's why I'm probably the most excited about.
Yeah, I agree. I was at a conference last week and we were talking about Internet of Things replenishment and do we need an order and what the impact is on back office processing, and if we're doing IoT and procurement, do we need an order? Mm-hmm. So, we've got a lot of paradigms, I think, that change. And one of the paradigms, mm-hmm. I think, is we've been thinking about analytics in terms of what I think is alphabet soup reporting, right? So in the research, when I ask people about analytics, they will often talk about reporting on top of what I call the alphabet soup of functional applications, the CRM, SRM, ERP, APS, PLM, whereas there's a need to define an analytics layer between our operational investments and workforce productivity to really allow cloud-based applications that can go across value streams, the streaming of data, which allows data to happen at near real time, and pools of data that allows us to access the data to be able to use. So, as we get into clouds and streams and pools of data and get out of traditional mindsets of reporting off of traditional applications, I think we start to redefine system of record and we start to redefine processes. So, Kimberly, anything occur to you that we can do differently now with these new forms of data architectures that we couldn't do before, or anything excite you?
Yeah, I would first say I'm still learning in this area. And one of the things that struck me as I was speaking to some of my colleagues was that, the old age view of databases and, reporting, traditional business intelligence, had to do with the way you had to have complete data sets, you had to define relationships in advance. And I think we're getting to the point where it's easier to combine multiple sources of data, multiple types of data, and not necessarily know those relationships in advance. And I think that's actually more groundbreaking than most of us realize, that we are kind of leapfrogging over earlier generations of technology to help support what we've all talked about, that ability to use data for better decision making and better outcomes. So that's what I'm trying to really understand. I think, what we can do is we can do a lot of the things that we probably could do in the past, but took a lot more time and were a lot more expensive.
Right. And I think, as we move to schema on read from schema on write, and we use machine learning, we can break some of those handcuffs, I think, to better use data. Rick, what is your perspective? What can we do differently now with new forms of data architectures that we couldn't do before? What excites you?
Well, I think that, what was just mentioned with, being able to connect these sources of data that we may have not thought were relevant once upon a time. Now that we have the capability to do that, I think we can unlock immense insights. I think that, from a very early age, we have been fundamentally taught to think in a linear fashion, to think very logically, to, manage as we all know, in rows and columns, and we think that way and our thoughts are structured that way. And being able to unlock new correlations, new causals, new insights by connecting these different forms of data that are in different structures but can still work together with today's technology is an immense power. And I think it's a capability that the companies who leverage it and leverage it well will leapfrog competition. I don't think it's a space where you can afford to be a late adopter. I think that you have to figure out a way within your organization to unlock those disparate data sources across the organization and connect them so that you can actually unlock those insights. So there's a ton of opportunity there. I don't think most companies Most companies don't know how to do it. The top 10% who are doing it well are, would be great role models for others to emulate as quickly as they can.
Rick, unfortunately, I think we've got a lot of our IT spending tied up in legacy maintenance contracts, and I think you experienced that firsthand. So we're going to come back later and explore how you get at this. Cone, your thoughts here?
Yep. No, I think indeed, if you some examples indeed of where I see that companies are busy with trying to create new insights out of combining different sources of data is that the whole element about sensing, right? So we're looking always towards the demand signal as kind of the holy grail already over the last so many years. We're trying to use now machine learning and AI techniques to even increase that, let's say, capturing or grabbing the demand signal both on the short and the long term. What I'm also fascinated about is that we see companies using all kind of new data combinations to sense other signals which are also influencing the final planning decision or company decision. So companies are using new kind of data to sense, for example, internal parameters such as forward-looking capacities, no longer just a static dynamic capacity of XYZ per day or per month, but looking at influencing factors, looking beyond even current influencing factors and leading indicators for tomorrow's influencing factors to start sensing also other elements that influence company decisions, such as, for example, what is the raw material price? What will the raw material price be tomorrow? What will it be next month? And how is that influenced by external factors? And how can we use those new data insights into other planning decisions that used to be probably more straightforward, but less clever? And today we can use those data insights to drive it. And I think that's a whole new area where I think a lot of improvement still is possible. So that's really where, and I think most of the companies we still are still exploring in that area, but this will be something that in 1 or 2 years as of now will become common practice rather than the other way around.
I think, Lora, it might be worth kind of revisiting the definition we created in the analyst community for big data, the 3 V's or the 4 V's, if you will. So it's related to the volume of data, certainly, the variety of data, the velocity, the speed at which we want to consume the data and analyze the data and apply it, and then the value. So making the creation of value from that data at a price point and at a speed that really changes the game.
I agree. So let's go on. Let's talk now a little bit about what we've got on some of, I think, the real major shifts. Rick talked about we've been trained at an early age to think about data in rows and columns and hierarchies, and this is schema on write. We have written all of our supply chain data into relational databases, which has required us to have very, very well-defined master data and relationships. But we know business changes and that we need flexibility here. So as we go to schema on read, where we can have applications that work off of data lakes to be able to read data and read the schema as we need it, is a real game changer. The other thing is the traditional deployment of the last 2 decades has been about linear flows with tight coupling to ERP. And we now know that the supply chain is becoming more and more nonlinear with both global growth and increasing complexity. So as a result, our linear thinking needs to change, and we need to be able to embrace new forms of analytics to move from descriptive and predictive analytics into prescriptive and cognitive analytics. An example that we had of combining these was actually a Merck case study that we had in our webinar 2 months ago, where Barath was talking about, his journey for supply chain visibility and the fact that they had been working on this for multiple years, and then they found that when they could put structured and unstructured data in a data lake and use a form of cognitive computing with schema on read, that they could better drive visibility. So I would encourage you to listen to that webinar. And he got a higher level of supply chain visibility by using schema on read and structured and unstructured data and cognitive computing. So let's change the order a little bit. Cone, what excites you here in this area? Is it cognitive?
Yep.
Is it schema on read? What excites you here?
Yep. Well, for me, it's I think it's more. I think I truly recognize a lot of what you just mentioned that also was mentioned in the other webinar, right? Where a lot of companies over the years have grown, and through that growth, they have realized that they are in a boat which is becoming bigger and bigger and probably more and more difficult to manage and to steer. So their holy grail was always to move towards one kind of ERP layer to get that, let's say, feeling of control over that boat. But all these programs, I think, or at least a lot of them, have either costed multi-million programs efforts and also throughput time to realize. And we see most companies coming back from it actually and seeing what is actually the reason that they're trying to do that. Actually, the reason indeed is to get end-to-end visibility, is to get visibility, to get control over decisions throughout that entire area space or business space. And by, let's say, enabled by actually these new technologies, indeed, to combine structured, non-structured, all different types of data in a new lake is obviously very appealing. But the crux of the matter there, obviously, is still to tie it together. And there, I think all elements on, indeed, cognitive computing, etc., in order to tie those lines together, to create a virtual twin or a digital twin of your physical network, on the one hand, to get end-to-end visibility, and then secondly, even to start linking planning decision data or business decision data together to create actually a cognitive vision of that end-to-end network. That's really a space of development where we see a lot of potential. It's still, I think, early stage because it's still quite innovative, but it is very promising and there is a lot of business value to reap there down the road.
I agree. Rick, now you were actually doing some work with data lakes when you were at Kellogg and some early work on prescriptive analytics. What's your view here?
Well, yes, I was. I will tell you it was a very difficult and time-consuming journey to get to the point where we had a nice subset of data in the data lake. I think the thing that we ran into is, and I'm going to go a little bit sidebar here. I think all of the examples you mentioned are things that companies talk about and think about. I think their struggle is with the ability to put the current investment model, and you mentioned we talk a little more about this in a bit, but to put the right kind of investment model with some of these opportunities that they want to seize, because they're still very old-fashioned in the way that they approach them. There's no doubt that everyone believes that there's great opportunity in end-to-end supply chain visibility, not just supply chain for that matter, across the spectrum of your business. Visibility and transparency can be the key, but it's a little bit like analysis. If you don't have the resource commitment and the investment commitment within the organization to be able to go to that next step, so when you think about what cognitive computing can do and the things it will unlock, but also the new lessons it will teach you and the opportunities that you may not have realized existed prior, where's the organization going to be as they start tackling all of these opportunities that are coming forth? And then what is the resource and investment commitment to be able to support them? There's no ROI for a premise, right? It's the realization and the execution implementation of seizing the opportunity that actually generates return. So I think companies are struggling with how to do it and actually how to be able to put the resources in place to seize it.
Yeah, and we don't know what the ROI is. So, we've got a discontinuity here where innovators are kind of mapping the path forward. Kimberly, you got any thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly great comments from both of the panelists. I'm always concerned when people are talking about the data lake as the objective. And I agree with you, Lora, that we don't want to give a single application really the control of our reporting, because that's just not how life works. But the concern about a data lake is that sometimes people start losing perspective on what they should be doing in real time, because usually the data lake isn't intended for any type of real-time applications, and maybe that will change over the long term. But I find that staying focused on fairly narrow use cases is helping manufacturers move forward, because then they can identify specific objectives and they can measure the success of those projects and use any kind of savings or benefits to fund the next project.
Well, let's move on now. Let's talk a little bit about cognitive. You know, we've got the movement from descriptive analytics, things like Tableau and QuickView and Spotfire, predictive analytics, which are the decision support tools that we've deployed for revenue management, trade promotion management, some in CRM, some in supplier relationship management, a lot in planning, to prescriptive analytics, which not only gives us exceptions but tells us what to do with it, and the movement to cognitive analytics, which allows us to sense, learn, and respond. And this movement up the stack from predictive to prescriptive to include unstructured text and pattern recognition, to drive machine learning, to then move to cognitive computing, to drive the autonomous supply chain, requires us to really rethink some paradigms. So if you think about the current state, most companies have 5 to 7 ERP systems. They've got 3 planning systems, but really the workhorse of planning is Excel spreadsheets, and we have a lot of people in Excel ghettos working hard on macros. And as we think about rules-based ontologies and cognitive engines and prescriptive and cognitive analytics, we've got a huge change management issue to first be able to test and learn and be sure we have better answers, but also to be able to redefine use cases. And these are some use cases for cognitive, right? Data mapping, master data management, replacement of data standards, redefinition of rules, which I find really exciting, for multiple ifs to multiple thens, which can redefine things like allocation, transportation routing, assortment, redefining planning, thinking about insights, answering questions we don't know to ask, perhaps listing posts, combining unstructured data, sentiment data with Internet of Things to be able to drive channel listing posts, quality, warranty data, quality, drive better outcomes, customer-centric value chains to be able to connect customer data into better rules or a network of networks, which allows us to be able to use cognitive computing with blockchain to be able to redefine processes that currently move through EDI and supply chain operating networks. So those are some of the cognitive use cases. Cone, do you have any to add? And, you know, if so, share. And if not, tell me if you think this is exciting, and if so, what you think people should do with it.
Yep. Well, first of all, I think I want to start with mentioning that probably if we look to our customer base, that a lot of the customers, if you look to the 4 steps that you highlight here on the slides, I think a lot of our customers are still, I would say, in the descriptive and taking the step towards predictive, using data for predictive insights. The companies that we see that are moving towards prescriptive and cognitive are really the early adopters and are very innovative and trying to build use cases. So it's not that we see huge amounts of use cases today yet in that area, but slowly the companies are moving towards that. I think, again, a lot of companies are still a little bit, like Rick mentioned, trying to get value out of the massive investments they've done in, I would say, the static data environments that they've been building over the last 5 to 10 years, and trying to see how that can help them to get value out of descriptive analysis and trying to use that to predict some key elements in their decision making. But the prescriptive, so what they should do, and the cognitive, where it's really intelligent responding, limited companies are there. And then I also agree with you, Laura, that will create a huge change impact in the way that we're driving our businesses. So if you look at some use cases in the prescriptive and cognitive world, so one of the elements that we've encountered, which is interesting in one of the leading food processors here in Europe, is that actually they're trying to combine integrated business planning with really operational impact of line cooling. And what they're doing is not only using different types of internal data like planning data, ERP data, and MES data, but also external data like weather data to get new insights in being prescriptive on what to do. So how should they plan? How should they plan certain line capacity? And should they, for example, try to do proactive cooling of certain lines in order to constantly operate at the optimum? So they're combining new insights of data to try to be prescriptive, both towards planning as well as to engineering operations, to see what they have to do in the coming weeks to keep on operating at the optimum under certain weather conditions. So those are really nice use cases, but we still see them relatively fragmented, use case by use case, trying to more, I would say, argue for the value of moving towards that kind of decision making, rather than being applied on a large scale. And on the cognitive element, we also see that companies today are even trying to capture the outcome of decision-making processes, not to do something with it yet today, but to start building a legacy, start building a log, if you want, that allows for potential cognitive use cases in the future. So it's still very early, to be honest, but again, quite promising and a lot of business value to be reaped from that in the next 5 years.
Rick, your thoughts?
Cohen, sorry, Cohen, given that you work so much with digital twins, I mean, I think it's important for people to understand how digital twins are the representation of that information in an easier to consume fashion. I think that's a big part of driving the adoption.
Yeah, no, correct. So one of the first things that we always do when we work with customers on in our area of digital transformation and lights out planning is to create a virtual twin. So what we really see is that our customers today are lagging a virtual overview of how their physical world is moving. So that lack of end-to-end visibility over their physical supply chain really lags them from making the right decisions. So what we do is we actually start combining different sources of information, so operational data, planning data, ERP data, customer data, procurement data, financial data, to create a virtual representation of their actual physical world. And this based on one set of data, which is the company data. It's no longer the data of planning. It's no longer the model of operations. It's no longer just the financial representation. It's one virtual overview that gives you the physical dimension, gives you the business dimension, the transactional dimension, gives you the financial dimension of that end-to-end world. And we link that back to each of the source systems so that we keep each of the drivers. This really goes into the details of bills of materials, routings. It goes over physical transfers between supply chain nodes. It goes over fixed costs, variable costs that are being driven by those physical activities. So those are being kept in sync with the source systems, being it a central data lake or even, if necessary, with a local system where required. And we keep that in sync so that that entire business community, being it planning, operations, customer service, whatever, has that one view, one version of the truth of how that end-to-end supply chain is operating today, how it was operating yesterday, and then by combining these different types of data, more and more toward how it will be behaving tomorrow, so that they can try to start making better business decisions to create value out of tomorrow.
Right. Okay. Rick, do you have a cognitive use case that excites you, or anything to add here?
Well, a couple of quick things. One is, you start out here in the list of use cases, and several of them mention data, and I absolutely believe, and I've seen some work that I think has great potential for organizations to kind of leapfrog the current state of their data creation and data management processes, especially when it comes to master data and attribution around some of their primary data domains, to leverage this technology to improve it. I've seen some cases where some organizations have taken that on, and I think that companies still today believe that data is just a very tactical necessity for the most part, especially when it comes to their master data, and they believe that it's just better to just put 30 people in a room and go fix it. But I absolutely believe that's not sustainable with the complexity that's being driven in the marketplace today, and with the shorter and shorter life cycles of products, especially in the food industry. So I think that there's a great opportunity around the data processes. And then the second piece would be around the systems of insights with omnichannel, and the fact that, as I mentioned, product life cycles are shortening, consumer trends are changing very rapidly. It seems sometimes their attention span's about 3 seconds, and you have to seize that opportunity within that 3 seconds, or it's passed you by. I do believe that this is an opportunity to leverage these different forms of data and help you become more prescriptive on what you should do, and understanding when that 3 seconds is going to arrive, what you should do when it gets there. I think there's a great opportunity there. It's just too complex to be able to manage it the way companies have managed it for the last 25 years.
Yep, and I don't think we're ready to rethink it. Now, Cone, let's talk about the digital twin. We've done what-if analysis. We've done scenario planning historically. How is the digital twin different than simulation or what-if analysis? How would you characterize it? Because I only meet probably 1% of companies that are working on a digital twin.
Yeah. Well, how it's different is it goes much beyond, let's say, what if and simulation, right? It really goes about use case by use case, building up that virtual representation of your current end-to-end supply chain network, and because by doing so, enabling a platform that can leverage a lot of business value in the mid and the long term. So it goes beyond what if and simulation. It goes towards creating a virtual, let's say, world which mirrors your physical world directly and as much as possible in real time, so that yes, you can do what if simulation and scenario management, but you can also on that platform leverage AI techniques, etc., to create new insights, but also to feed that back towards the real world. I think if you look to a lot of what if scenario management programs, over the last 5 years, they required a lot of data, which on a one-off basis you fed a model, you did, let's say, a discrete number of scenarios with it, and based upon that, you fed something back towards a lower execution process. And that kind of integration with a virtual twin is just going towards the next level. It's really trying to, in real time, keep in sync a constant virtual version of your physical network, and by doing so, enabling direct feedback also from decisions that you make into that real world. So I think the worst thing that you can do is to have what-if scenarios as an OP process, whatever, out of which you take a certain decision which are not fed back towards the real world. And that's really that integration that you want between your physical and your virtual world. And that's where I think these whole new ways of cognitive computing can create that link much quicker, much more real time, so that integration creates more business value for companies in the next 5 years.
And so Ed asked the question, Cone, are we talking about a twin of the product or about the process in the supply chain?
Yeah, well, I think it's both. It's both, right? So I think most of the companies today are trying to create a first step of that virtual twin based on the physical elements, so the products, the nodes, and how end-to-end they are moving throughout the supply chain and creating value. I think the second one is more the process element to it, which kind of business processes are being done and which kind of decision-making is being driven by those business processes. I think for me, that's the next level of the virtual twin, where actually also all business processes and decision-making processes you're going to virtualize and have then afterwards fed into AI algorithms, etc., to also help you to drive better decision-making there. But those are really the next step, I think. Most companies that we see start to create a virtual twin to get end-to-end visibility in real time. But then secondly, obviously, they will also start to mirror business processes and business decisions on that platform.
Got it. I think the digital twin could be a system. So it could be multiple products or, products as part of a process. So it's definitely, it depends on what you're trying to achieve, right?
Right. Now, Kimberly, how many companies have you actually come in contact with that are working on the digital twin? How new do you think this concept is?
Yeah, so I think it is Well, the concept itself is not new because it comes from the PLM world, and it's a term that goes back to DARPA. And so for quite some time, it's been a common term and an increasingly common term in the product design world. But I think that the broader application of the digital twin concept is very new, and it's difficult to accomplish. But I do think that cognitive computing and artificial intelligence and machine learning in general are really the key. And based on the data I see for the adoption of AI, it's still fairly low. I mean, just to give you some perspective, it's according to IDC, the cognitive and AI spending is about $57 billion in 2021, whereas IoT spending is already at $772 billion in 2018. So it's got a long way to go, but the growth rate is really, really high. And there are a lot of technologies out there and companies like Cohen's that are helping people use AI, really get it up to speed quickly. And I think the benefits are really, really significant.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think
now we recently, go ahead. Is there something else you want to add?
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to pick in on something that Kimberly said. So I also fully agree with the fact that it's not really new, right? So also in other industries, for other applications, the element of creating a virtual set of what physically is happening in order to do some simulation and etc. and decision making up front or next to the real world. I think that has indeed in product development, etc., always been the case. I fully agree with Kimberly that the real innovation here, that it's really the scale at which we're leveraging. And the scale at which we're leveraging is indeed only able by all these new technologies like machine learning and AI. Because that's really the lever, I would say, not the end result in itself, but the lever to move towards that, let's say, virtual twin at a totally different scale, which is almost a company scale.
Okay. And I don't want to get hung up on the product. I'm sorry, I'm keeping you on this topic. I'll stop now.
Okay. Well, we don't want to get hung up on the product or the process. I think the whole concept of representation and kind of the coalescence is important. We're going to wrap up now. Driving disruption. We finished an analytics study, and we asked people to look at the most disruptive analytic strategies in the next 5 years and today. And what we found is today we're moving a lot more around Internet of Things and data visualization. And in the future, it's still a little further out, is blockchain, cognitive computing, software robots, which is really a form of automation to allow the autonomous supply chain and drones. Kimberly, what do you think about this? What do you think about disruptive and promise? Two different concepts, but how do you see these technologies?
Which one of the technologies or all of the technologies?
All of them together in terms of disruption of the supply chain.
Yeah, I definitely see them driving value. And again, this comes back to the digital innovation and the digital transformation. And I think it's important for companies to make sure that they don't get lost in the big concept of digital transformation, that they can break it down into specific business objectives. And one of the ones that we did not talk a lot about are the ones that touch the customers or touch the consumers. And I think there are, that's actually one of the areas that a lot of manufacturers are investing first, because they know that they have to continue to grow their customer base. They have to continue to keep their customers loyal and to keep that customer satisfaction up. And so sometimes it's using artificial intelligence in the form of chatbots on their e-commerce sites, or using drones and robots physical robots in the warehouses to make the fulfillment process even quicker and more accurate. So it's definitely these technologies are definitely driving real business change.
Rick, your thoughts here?
Well, I absolutely think disruptive is the right word. The disruption might be more within an organization than it is across the landscape of their end-to-end processes. But I think that the end-to-end processes, for instance, is one of the areas that has great promise, because companies have historically thought of an end-to-end process, for instance, to be end-to-end within their walls, which we all know is not the way the process works. The promise of blockchain across transaction processing end-to-end, being able to streamline that work, that's something that I think companies can get their arms around. And I think one of the greatest promises coming from a food manufacturing background is the promise of product traceability and farm to fork, and the ability for blockchain to play a role in that. I think it's an area that food manufacturers are going to latch onto and try to figure out how they can utilize those technologies to provide the solution to a problem that, quite frankly, they don't have a solution for. It's with the complexity and the scale that large companies operate under, a little different than when Honest Tea was starting up and they controlled it from start to finish, the product from start to finish. But for large companies at scale, that's a huge area of opportunity, and I would say that blockchain might be just the key to being able to unlock a solution for that.
So we've talked about concepts like analytics, open source analytics, schema on read, digital twin, blockchain, immutable ledgers, cognitive computing. What I would say is embrace the new technologies at the right time. Not everybody's an innovator. If you're a late adopter, follow the innovators. We've got about 7% of companies that are actually moving with cognitive computing, but they're moving at a slow rate. And concepts like digital twin are all new, and schema on read technologies are, evolving, but they still have a lot of risk. So when you do this, focus with the goal in mind. Don't just test technology. Don't just test blockchain, or don't just test data lakes. Really try to solve a hairy problem, and always remember the supply chain is not a linear problem. It's a complex system and nonlinear thinking. Kimberly, what else would you add to people that are listening today as they think about this?
I think that the line of business lead should work with their IT organizations to make sure that they can not just address a single problem, but make sure that the way that they're using technology and investing in technology is something that they can build on, and also integrate with those other applications and be able to get to what you and Rick have talked about so much today in terms of the end-to-end objectives. I think that's really important.
Rick, any other advice you'd have for people?
Be patient with your organization as they try to figure these things out. This is immensely disruptive for a company to leverage technologies to go solve business problems, and it's going to take a while for leadership to really understand it and probably provide the right support. So I think that the company will need disruptors within the organization to help drive the changes, and those people in those roles need to be somewhat patient as they try to help educate the organization of the opportunity.
Cone, anything else to add?
Perhaps some final thoughts from my end is first of all, I would say to the audience is dare to think big. I think although probably a lot of what has been said today, and also if you look at these disruptive innovations, they sometimes can feel overwhelming. I would say it sometimes looks a lot, but I think today is a time to dare to think big, because the vision of where technology will go towards the next 5 to 10 years is indeed huge, but to start small and indeed to try to find a use case where business value is central. I don't think doing the technology for the technology is what is advisable. So try to find the first use case where there is immediate view on, is there a business value in adopting one of these new technologies, yes or no, and dare to fail fast if it's not. But if it is, and if it's successful, do it in such a way that you can scale it. Because I think that's also one of the advantages today, that a lot of these cloud-based technology and applications are hugely scalable. So do it in a way that is smart, so that if there is business value, you can scale it and you can operate at a level that has true business impact without having to do it from scratch again.
Yeah, a couple of questions. Makarand is asking if anyone's using blockchain, and I actually find blockchains being used more within the organization to go across the systems that, complex technologies or use of structured data, contracts with transactional data, or one-to-one, but blockchain at a scalability level and a capability level has not really matured to really be one-to-many, and definitely not many-to-many. It's really being overhyped right now. Kimberly, your thoughts there?
It's definitely being overhyped. Now, that doesn't mean that it can't provide significant value, but the number of actual projects that are happening right now, I think, outside of some financial processing and contract-focused ones, I think the project count is actually pretty low. Pilots, proof of concepts, I think they're underway. And what I have been telling manufacturers is that you do need to be experimenting, and if not experimenting, then at least educating yourself, because it is going to be something that you want to use in the future.
And Jim Rick says, isn't the elephant in the room the fact that business process leaders, owners, aren't really up to speed on these technologies, and so they have difficulty talking to IT about it? Do you think this is true? And if so, as a former business process owner, how do people get up to speed?
Well, I think you're asking me this question. I absolutely think that that's true. I think that, I even see it now that, executives within specific functions, when they don't have the answers to problems, or, they don't have a solution, or things aren't going the direction, their metrics are starting to fail, they still have a tendency to go back to something that worked prior. And we have to kind of break that train of thought to look at what the opportunities are to move forward with the new technologies and leveraging their data in different ways. It's just an old habit. And I think that, as I mentioned before, I think organizations need disruptors within their organization to educate, to drive and get the right sponsorship, to be able to do some experimentation, to test, to learn, and to share those findings. Because it's very difficult for the C-suite to unlock funding for an experiment. You have to have people within the organization that are driving the change, that are the change agents, that can get the support to go drive that agenda.
Got it. All right, we're going to have to close now. I encourage people to look for more research on our websites. These are some of the sources that you can find. I want to thank Kimberly and Rick and Cone for joining us today. We will be making this available in a webcast format for people to listen to. Please share. And then join us next month as we're going to be talking about blockchain pilots. We'll be talking about some of the work we're doing in the network of networks, testing pilots. We still are not clear on the definition of a node. We've got some issues around scalability with blockchain. We'll talk a little bit about some of the work we're doing in testing. Until next time, thanks for joining us this month.